Hey, welcome everyone. We're so happy that you could join us for Reclaiming Our Love, the network's social justice and domestic violence conference. We're so excited to welcome our keynote speaker, Feminista Jones, to the conference. Feminista Jones is a widely known social activist, a Philadelphia-based feminist, writer, public speaker, retired social worker, and community activist. She's an award-winning blogger and the author of 4 books, including the most recent book selection for the network's book club, which is Reclaiming Our Space, How Black Feminists Are Changing the World from the Tweets to the Streets. Ms. Jones' writing and activism centers Black American culture, feminism, critical race theory, intersectionality, mental health, poverty, and a women's health and well-being. Feminista sits on the boards of the Wayfinder Foundation, a grant-making organization that invests in women making a difference in their underserved communities, and the Hope Center for Community College and Justice, a nonprofit research organization that advocates for the needs of disenfranchised college students. Ms. Jones' work came to the network initially following her Patreon post on the case of Marcia Johnson and bond and criminal justice reform and the safety that survivors need as we pursue criminal justice reform, a topic that you all know is at the heart of the work of the network now, as we have eliminated cash bail in Illinois with protections for victims. So I can't wait to hear what Feminista Jones has to say about all of her areas of expertise. So welcome, Ms. Jones. We're so happy that you were able to make it.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm truly honored to speak here today. It's so funny. This particular article had just come up in another conversation, so it really kind of flows because I'm still thinking about this topic of what does justice look like, right? So we're going to get into that today. I hope all of you know that I'm very conversational with my presentation, so I will give you some stuff. And then after, I hope that we have a robust Q&A session. I want you all to feel like you are in conversation with me as I am in conversation with you, because I think that these are ongoing conversations that we have. And that's the key to community building, is really kind of digging deep into that. So I don't want you all feeling like you're being lectured to or anything like that, but just that we are having a conversation that is ongoing. First of all, I just love this conference idea and this idea of reclaiming our love. And I'm so honored to be a part of that. When I was writing Reclaiming Our Space, I was really thinking about all the ways in which women have to reclaim so many parts of their lives, right? And when we think about intimate partner violence and domestic violence, which I am a survivor of, as I know that some of you watching and listening, you are advocates and you are survivors, love is so essential because we start to lose our sense of love. And the sense of love that we lose the most is a sense of our love for ourselves. So I'm so glad that this is about reclaiming that love, reclaiming our love for ourselves, reclaiming our loves for our communities and each other. So again, I just want to thank you all for having me here. We are smack dab in the middle of Women's History Month. And it's always an honor when people ask me to come and speak during Women's History Month, because I think that it's important to acknowledge that celebrating Women's History Month should be more than just about honoring accomplishments and different types of successes. While those are important, it should also be about acknowledging the ways in which women have endured and persevered despite the obstacles and in the face of oppression. I don't think that we can celebrate Women's History Month without acknowledging the history of survival, the history of resilience, the history of building community and empowering each other through every situation thrown our way. So I just want you all to just kind of take a couple of seconds to really just sit with that, because sometimes I think we focus so much on success and there's a little bit of respectability politics that goes with that, and not enough time thinking about the everyday woman and the everyday woman's struggles and her own resilience. So we could just take a second to think about that. So yes, my name is Feminista Jones, and I like to think of myself as an activist. Think of myself also as an advocate, an educator, a facilitator, a community builder. I like to think that my passion for helping marginalized and oppressed people has sustained my work. And I think that my commitment to women's liberation is rather clear. The older I get, the more I find myself wondering if all of this work has been for nothing. Because sometimes when you look around how things are in the world, it feels like we are emptying the ocean with a teaspoon. And are things really getting better? It can feel hopeless at times. But I want to tell you that if you're feeling hopelessness, at least you're feeling something. It's when you start feeling apathetic that it becomes a problem. Hopelessness can be turned around. Apathy is a little bit harder to engage. So what do we know? I'll just bring out the negative statistics that we do know. 1 in 4 women in the US experience extreme physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner. 1 in 10 have been raped or sexually assaulted by an intimate partner. 1 in 7 have been stalked. Globally, 1 in 3 women have experienced some type of physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner, and 38% of all murders of women are by intimate partners. In the US, 3 women die every day as a result of intimate partner violence, and 57% of mass shootings are related to domestic violence, which usually includes a man killing his wife and his children. These are called family annihilators. And every day, there are about 20,000 calls made to domestic violence hotlines every day. You all know this. You all are passionate about raising awareness and advocating for survivors and calling for change. But sometimes we have to name the issues as they are. We also have an issue with people using passive voice. The woman was assaulted. The woman was beaten. When truly, it usually is a man beat this woman. A man assaulted this woman. Part of our liberation work is how we look at language and how language is used. And as a writer, I'm very particular about that. And so I've committed, and I hope you all join me, to stop using passive voice when we're talking about these issues and to be very direct. It's not that women wake up and happen to fall into these situations. It is that people are acting out violence against women and girls, and we need to name that as well. These statistics are just a sampling of what it looks like every day. And despite the feminist efforts that have been made for decades, for over a century, to educate, legislate, and regulate, gender-based violence continues to be a huge issue, and women and girls remain unsafe and largely vulnerable. The key, in my opinion, is prevention. We talk about anti-oppressive frameworks, and we talk about, what can we do to bring it end? We have to end it before it begins. Prevention, prevention, prevention. Prevention education is where we can start. I remember when George W. Bush was president, he slashed a lot of prevention education program funding. It was one of the worst things that could have been done because we were teaching young people in the schools from kindergarten up how to engage each other with respect and honor. We were teaching them about these things, and yet that education funding was cut. We have to start with the early interventions and how we raise our children. This is something that I talk about, a lot of people don't even think about, because I'm raising a son. And one of the things that I thought about when I had him was how can I make sure that I am raising a son who will grow into a man that does not harm women? Well, it has to start with how I engage him as his mother and the ways in which I let him get away with things that he probably shouldn't get away with. And we don't even think about that. So I'll give you an example. For those of you that are parents or that plan to be parents, when your child comes and says, "Mommy, can I have a cookie?" And you say, "No, it's too late for you to have a cookie." And they say, "Please," and you're like, "No." And then they go and they kick something or they knock something over because they're upset and they're mad. And then they start screaming and crying. And you've had a long day and you just can't take it. And they just give them the cookie. What you've taught your child is that nobody has to take their no. They don't have to take no for an answer. And that if they just kick up enough dust and cause enough ruckus, they can get what they want. That's an early lesson that we teach our children about coercion and about getting their way. We have to remain steadfast in teaching them about boundaries, teaching them to honor boundaries. When my son, when I read his text messages one day, and a young woman was telling him, "Please stop saying those things. I don't like to read that." And he kept talking to her, kept texting her these curse words. She said, "My parents, if they see this, I'll get in trouble." And he said, "F your parents." And I don't even tell you how I reacted to that. But my biggest disappointment was that he was not honoring and respecting her boundaries. So I took his phone for a long time and I told him to write an essay about why it's important to respect boundaries, especially the boundaries of girls. And he had to write a whole essay about it. And we had a long talk about that. These are the things that we can do as parents when we're raising our children and how to engage each other with care, with concern, with love, with respect, and with honor. Okay. We have to also think about the interventions when it comes to trauma. Now, I am a retired social worker. I was working in housing and homeless and anti-poverty and anti-hunger in some of the most distressed communities in New York, both New York and in Philadelphia. And one thing I'll tell you is that trauma is rampant. And trauma is one of the primary causes for violence in these communities. And what I do know is that when we intervene early, we are able to set people on a course to have healthier outcomes. But that's not what's happening in these communities. We have to start with getting mental health services into these communities. I remember working with a community doing neighborhood revitalization. This is a neighborhood that had a 60% unemployment rate, a 40% poverty rate, and 1/3 of the population was under the age of 21. And when you looked for the Black men that were ages 25 to 40, there were hardly any of them because they were either dead or in jail or they'd left. What that community needed was early intervention, and they needed mental health services. There were no mobile clinics coming in. There was no access to anything local where they could go and get the support that they needed. And what I proposed was that we get a mobile clinic set up where people could come and get free or low cost mental health care to work through the trauma of living in a neighborhood with the highest gun violence rate in their city. These are the kinds of things that communities need, but they are not getting. And when we talk about how we can really work in from an anti-oppressive lens, we don't want carceral solutions. We want community-based solutions. Communities have to have responsibility for some of this as well. A lot of times we rely on the government and say, oh, well, the government needs to intervene and they need to do these things. But it really is the communities that have to come together, because you know what? I live in Philadelphia and I'm just gonna say it. Our government does not do enough to support the needs of the people. And that's why there are so many grassroots organizations really doing heavy lifting in their own communities. Community members have to step up, and you have to build coalitions, and you have to do the grassroots work. The earlier the interventions, the better. And social workers can come in, and mental health specialists can come in, and we can work on facing a lot of the terrible traumas and heal and grow together. We know that for women living in poverty, they have a 7 times greater likely to experience domestic violence and intimate partner violence, because so much of it is wrapped up in economics. Now, I don't want to say that women who are middle class or upper class don't experience these types of trauma and this type of violence, because they do. We just know statistically, as we get to the lower income levels, the higher the incidences of this kind of violence against women and girls. So we have to think about that. Here's the thing. I've been a social worker for a long time. And one thing I know is the nonprofit industrial complex is a real thing, particularly when it comes to social work. I know that the history of social work has been one of racism, sexism, ableism, queerphobia, transphobia, classism. There's all these issues that go on within social work because I'm trying to be nice here, but for some time it was a white woman's pet kind of charity work. Go help the darkies, go help the people, the poor people. But the help that was being offered was often harmful, and it still is to this day. One of the reasons why I left the field and why I just decided, I'd given my all, is because I got tired of dealing with white people who had no sense of what was going on in these communities. And though they said they wanted to help, their prescriptions for help were not culturally competent and were not rooted in the needs of the community members. And when we talk about families and the destruction of families, social workers have played a big role in that. And their anti-Blackness and their misogynoir, for those who don't know, misogynoir is a particular misogyny against Black women, vilifying Black mothers as being inherently bad mothers, coming into communities and taking children away, separating families. Social work does have that history. But I also know that there are people like me that became social workers because we come from these communities and because we want to make a difference. So we need more of us to come into these spaces and be able to work with the communities that we grew up in, work with the people that we know better than anyone else to try to heal and help these folks. And for the men that are listening who are still thinking about, if you happen to be a student that's thinking about what to do, we need you to get into social work, to get into education. We need our young men to see more people like them in these spaces, okay? When it comes to addressing things in the moment or after the fact, because we've talked a bit about interventions, when it comes to addressing things in the moment or after the fact, we do have to consider gender, race, and class. And we have to take an intersectional approach to addressing domestic violence and avoid considering it as a singular issue of gender when race, class, orientation, ability, immigrant status, all these kinds of things factor in, okay? For those who don't know what intersectionality is, it was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1980s when she called upon us to look at the experiences of Black women as unique, as not just Black issues and not just women issues, but as we have these intersecting identities that are both oppressed and they combine to create a unique experience for us. And that feminists have to consider our Blackness and civil rights workers have to consider our womanhood. And that over time, it has grown and expanded to include various oppressed identities. So the disabled, undocumented, queer, trans, poor, we have to consider all of these things. As the Genesis Women's Shelter put it, an intersectional approach allows for more holistic understanding of an individual and their positioning in societal hierarchies that seeks to erase binary understandings and accounts for the complexities of life, especially in regards to more privileged versus more oppressed identity groups. An intersectional approach calls attention to the fact that we as a society cannot simply view an issue as one of race or gender, but must recognize that it is a problem that needs to take into account all parts of an individual's identity. By only focusing on one identity marker, for example, race or gender, we fail to both understand and resolve the problem completely. And I think that this is what we have to do when we're looking at communities, or for those of us that are doing work within really, especially distressed communities where domestic violence is rampant. And I happen to live in a city where domestic violence is a huge issue, Philadelphia. We have to go in with these approaches and understand the cultural nuances. And I may be focusing on Black women right now because I am a Black woman, but understand that this spreads to our Latina sisters, our Asian sisters, our Native sisters as well, okay? Black women are 3 times as likely to die as a result of intimate partner violence than white women. And while Black women only make up 8% of the population, 22% of homicides that result from domestic violence or intimate partner violence happen to Black women, and 29% of all victimized women, making it one of the leading causes of death for Black women ages 15 to 35. These are harrowing statistics, folks. So why is it that so much of what we read or we see about domestic violence centering white women? Native women have the highest rates of domestic violence, particularly interracial domestic violence, at the hands primarily of white men, okay? We have to be talking about more than just white women as victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. But part of why Black women aren't centered is because there's an inherent assumption of violence in the intimate relationships between Black people. So there's almost an expectation that Black women will be involved in violent relationships and that we choose it and even accept it as a standard way of being. Intersectionality also encourages us to consider the cultural nuances and be more competent. As I wrote in Time magazine almost 7 years ago, the reasons Black women suffer disproportionately from abuse are complex. Racism and sexism are 2 of the biggest obstacles that Black women in America face. But because many Black women and men believe that racism is a bigger issue than sexism, Black women tend to feel obligated to put racial issues ahead of sex-based issues. For Black women, a strong sense of cultural affinity and loyalty to community and race renders many of us silent, so our stories often go untold. One of the biggest related impediments to our hesitation is trusting the police or the justice system. As Black people, we don't always feel comfortable surrendering our own people to the treatment of a racially biased police state. And as women, we don't always feel safe calling police officers who may harm us instead of helping us. And when we do speak out or seek help, we too often face backlash from members of our own communities who believe we are airing out our dirty laundry and making ourselves look bad in front of white people. In this particular instance, we definitely have to rely more on community solutions and less on carceral solutions because we cannot trust the police. If we've learned anything in the last few years of seeing the activism that has come about is that no, we cannot trust the police to help us instead of harming us, okay? We need to know that more training is being done and the police are being accompanied by trauma specialists who can de-escalate situations of intimate partner violence. Before I left New York, I was running a supportive housing program where many of my residents had severe and persistent mental health issues. We would call for assistance and it would be 10, 12 police officers would come, but nobody would come offering more de-escalating support. Good thing that we were social workers and we were social service workers and able to help with the de-escalation. But my organization led the charge to make sure that police were becoming better trained at de-escalating these kinds of situations, but also having people ride along with them, people who were more trained in trauma and de-escalating. We need to see this across the country because unfortunately, as we have seen, police are trigger happy when it comes to Black and brown folks. And they're not really interested in knowing what's going on. All they see are violent beasts that they have to take down. And that is a problem. So the more of this kind of behavior is exposed, the more we see them for who they are and how the more oppressive they become and less likely we are to reach out. But immigrants are also particularly vulnerable, especially undocumented women. There's a lack of support and there's a lack of encouragement from their families to pursue the services that they need to get help. Many undocumented immigrants are socially isolated and don't have a community that they can rely on when they become victims of violence. A lot of times undocumented immigrants don't know the legalities and what legal avenues to pursue when they want to get help. A lot of times when English isn't your first language, it's very hard to communicate your concerns and the things that you're going through because we can be very ignorant in the United States when it comes to engaging people that don't speak English, even though we have no official language. There's a huge fear of deportation and it is justified because for the last few administrations, we have been deporting people like crazy. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry, I don't mean to use the word crazy. It has been ridiculous and it continues. We have locked children up in cages. We have separated families. We have harmed people. People are being assaulted. They're being treated horribly. So there is that fear of deportation that will silence victims of domestic violence. They're not coming from a place often where domestic violence is maybe taking it as seriously. I know that I'm getting my PhD now, and I just had a colleague do a presentation on machismo and how there's almost an acceptance of violence from men as a part of their masculinity and their manhood. Okay. There's also the fear of bringing shame to their families. I have a friend who is Muslim, and she talks a lot about how women are silenced because if they speak up, it brings shame to their families. There's a lot that is going on with our immigrants and with our undocumented sisters, and we all need to learn more about that and reach out and support them. And ultimately, the laws need to change. We need more protective legislation to protect women and girls. And I'm going to tell you, the United States does a piss poor job of all of that. Your restraining order means nothing. The police ridicule victims. They hide rape kits. They blame victims. Sometimes they even join in on the assaults, okay? We need to make sure that these laws are federally mandated. The difference in anti-violence laws from state to state make it difficult to bring people to justice and have the victims protected from violence. We need to call on our elected officials to prioritize matters of gender-based violence and keep on them until we see change. I'm gonna tell you something. If you're on Twitter and you're on Facebook and social media, you can reach out to your elected officials directly. I have done it many times and it is incredibly effective because when you point out a specific issue to them as a constituent, you're letting them know I elected you and I'm holding you accountable. Sometimes we try to go, oh, the president needs to do this or our senator needs to do this. But what about your local council people? Okay, what about the people that you can actually walk down the street and go to their office? Do you know where your council people's office are? You should get familiar with that. Because when things open back up, I'm hoping that they start seeing your faces and knowing you by first, middle, and last name, okay? The work that we must do to combat gender-based violence must be holistic and it must center women and girls. We need to have men stop talking over us, okay? I know a lot of you men that are watching, you wanna be helpful and you wanna be supportive, but you can't talk over us and you can't mansplain this. Okay. Yes, men are victims of domestic and intimate partner violence as well. And I totally believe that feminists ought to support them as well and take up that mantle. We are fighting against all of this. But the truth is that women and girls are more likely to experience that. And so while we're in Women's History Month, I am focusing on women and girls for this. We have to call it out. We have to name it. We have to continue to amplify the work being done by so many brave women around the country and the world. And we need to unite forces. So if you're in Chicago and you learn of some work that's being done in Los Angeles, you can and should reach out to those organizers and build solidarity and coalition. And one of the best ways to do that is via social media. I know a lot of times social media gets a bad rap, but I did just write a book about how powerful it can be. And I do believe that, even though I've fallen back from Twitter, because I do find it to be incredibly toxic at times. I'm still on Facebook, I'm still on Instagram, I'm still on Patreon, I'm still engaging people in these important conversations. But you can use social media to reach out and build coalition with people around the country and around the world. I learned so much about the work that women are doing in South Africa and in Paris and in the United Kingdom and in Jamaica just by being on social media. And they reach out to me to let me know this is what we're doing. Can you amplify that? So some of us have to amplify that. We have to make sure that we are supporting all of the work of sisters around the globe. And when I say sisters and when I talk about women, please know that I am including trans women in that. To me, that is understood, but it may not be understood. So I'm also going to name and claim that as well. I want us to do better. I want us to continue to push. I know it's tiring. Oh my God, it is exhausting. Every day you log on and you see some other nonsense being spit by some man who doesn't know anything. You want to punch him in the face. But know that we have to keep working and our work continues, and we will not give this fight up until we have the protections and the equal access and the rights for all women and girls, and that we all feel safe. Okay. So I think it's about that time. We're going to open it up for some Q&A and let's have a conversation. I see some stuff was in the chat. Yes, the explaining the definition of intersectional identities. That's right. We can't forget who we are, where we come from, and it impacts our point of view. It shapes who we are. Understanding this, we can help create the change we want to see. Absolutely, I agree with you. So we do have some stuff in the Q&A. Yay, I love when people ask questions. Because again, this is a conversation. There's 78 participants. So I'm hoping that we get some more questions. All right, let's see what the first one says. I'm going to read to everyone. What advice would you give to advocates who are dealing with secondhand trauma and it may be affecting their personal lives and relationships? For example, when having a male partner, how do you protect yourself from manipulative partners, but also to be able to have vulnerable and open yourself to romantic relationships? This is an amazing, amazing, amazing question. And I will speak personally as a survivor of domestic violence on more than one occasion. It can definitely make you not want to try again. And so we are going to be talking about reclaiming love. Give me those love questions, because I love those too. I did not really value myself. I didn't really love myself enough to walk away from the situations that were harming me. And that's not me blaming myself for anything, but it's just I had to recognize and acknowledge that part of the hardest thing about leaving a situation where you're being harmed is the value that you have for yourself. And I admit that I didn't value myself enough. It is very difficult. It's very difficult when you love someone and they're hurting you. You don't understand. You give everything. You just don't understand why this person would do this. And you want to remain vulnerable. You want to be open to future people that are not going to harm you. But then when it happens again, you're just like, maybe it's me. And I got into that place of feeling like, well, what is it about me that keeps attracting these people that want to harm me? And I had to go to therapy and I had to work through a lot of that. And I happen to be in a partnership right now that is the best that I've ever been in. And I know that this person would never, ever, ever hurt me because he is so anti-violence against women. He's so ready to, like, the minute he hears that a man is hurting a woman, he's ready to grab a gun and hurt the guy himself. But it took a while. And I went many years being single and not open because I was just like, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to go through the emotional abuse, the physical abuse. I don't want to do that anymore. But when I learned to value myself and when I learned to not settle for anything less than what I deserved, I opened myself up and found a person who is very loving and support. I didn't want to start blushing. Now you got me blushing over here. But how do you, what advice do you give to advocates? You know, what we talk about, self-care that came out of social work as a buzzword these days. When you're a giver, when you're a healer, when you're in doing this healing work, you are going to absorb some of that trauma. It's inevitable. But you have to think about how much how deeply you're going into it, right? So I know one of the reasons why I left the field is because after almost 18 years, I couldn't take it anymore. You have to know your threshold. You have to be able to recognize the signs when you're experiencing that burnout, and when it's really getting to a place where you're just like, I can't tell if this is me or I'm absorbing something from someone else. Is this disrupting me? Is this harming me? I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm struggling with breathing. You have to be able to recognize those things. And when you start seeing those signs, you have to pull back. As much as you want to keep fighting, as much as you want to keep advocating, there is nothing wrong with stepping away and pulling back, even if it's only temporary, to breathe, to regroup, to just kind of get yourself back together, get more in line with yourself. It can affect your personal relationships. You can start looking at your partner sideways, like, and then you're bringing in that stuff. I mean, you hear some of the worst stories every day, or you see the bruises and you see what the people are going through, and you just close yourself off. But the key is trying to connect with people that are a soft place to land when you get home. Somebody that you can just fall into and be like, okay, I know that you're not going to harm me. I know this isn't you, but this is what I experienced today. And I just need to just talk about it, and I need to be able to release it. And if you're lucky, they'll get you a spa day. They'll get you a spa day, or they'll get you some flowers or something, something like that. So I hope that helps. There's a question in the chat. Let me see. Hi, Feminista. Do you have any advice for someone who's looking to get involved in this kind of work, the healing, advocacy, community transformation, who doesn't have an educational or professional background in social work? Absolutely. So let me tell you, you don't have to be a social worker or an educator to get involved in this work. All you need to do is have a passion for helping people and caring about what happens to others, right? If any of us are trapped in any kind of situation, we're not free until all of us are free. If any of us is feeling oppressed, we are all oppressed. That's how I think about it. So we should all be working collectively. It doesn't matter what your profession is, doesn't matter whatever. You know what, I do recommend getting some training, looking locally and seeing if there's any kind of, sometimes volunteer training comes with a lot of that, the empathy training and the crisis intervention and de-escalation. Sometimes local colleges, community colleges especially, that can offer these kind of like certification programs that are like free or low cost, or local domestic violence programs sometimes will offer that kind of training for volunteers, just so that you can get a little bit more information, a little more training on it. But honestly, there's so many levels that you can get involved with. Definitely need the volunteers, definitely need organizers. You could be somebody who's really good at just organizing people. You could be somebody who is really good at administrative type things. I have a friend who is really amazing. She doesn't do the direct service work, but behind the scenes, she does a great administrative work, and we need that. You could be somebody who's really good at fundraising. Can you talk people, out of their wallets? That's needed, because these programs always are severely underfunded and need more money. Are you somebody who, let me see, what else? What other things that can people do? Oh, are you, this is what I used to, this one thing I used to do for women when I was working with these women who were self-advocates. I hit up my my makeup friends, all my friends that are like the beauty bloggers and stuff, and they offered to do makeovers for the women for free, right? And they would donate clothing and stuff. Like my plus size bloggers, they would get sample clothing and then they would end up donating it and those kinds of things. I had a friend who donated a whole big, huge bucket of like brand new top line makeup that I was able to give out to these women. So maybe you have those kinds of connections via social media. Maybe that's your thing. You reach out to some of the bloggers and say, hey, I'm working in this healing space. I would like to bring this healing. Maybe you know some florists that are willing to donate flowers, those kinds of things. I think kind of just thinking outside the box and how we think, like when I said, this is a holistic thing, to think about all the different angles and how we could go and work together and approach that. So let me see, there's some more in the Q&A. I love that the questions are coming in. Yes, the concept of emptying the ocean with a teaspoon feels so relevant right at this moment. Yes, it does. That's why I like to name it and claim it for what it is, because we have to be honest. We have to be honest about what's really happening. You say of all that's happened last year, rates of violence against women and female identified folks skyrocketed. Recent reports in the media this week, all of it. How do you crystallize your priorities? How do you stay strong in the course of your priorities when there's so many things coming at us? Okay, great. I get to use my orchestra analogy here. So you're not going to be able to do everything. No one person can do everything, but each person can do one thing really well. And so I like to present this, this analogy. Imagine that you are part of an orchestra and you play an instrument. You're a flautist or a pianist or a guitar player, and you're really, really, really good. Your notes on your pages are going to look different. Your contributions are going to be different. But when you're sitting side by side with other people who are also making their contributions, you're making a beautiful sound together. And the audience only hears that synchronized sound. They're not necessarily singling out each instrumental, right? Unless you have a solo, of course. So I like to think of advocates as all instrumentalists. You all are passionately playing your instrument. You're focusing on your area, on this one area that you know that you can give your all to. And if we each did that, and look at all the work that could come. So how do I crystallize my priorities? I focus specifically on Black mothers these days. My PhD work actually is in looking at Black motherhood and representations of Black motherhood in the hip hop generation. I'm very much interested in the experience of Black mothers, and not from a trauma or pathologized point of view, from an uplifting one, from a positive and affirming one. So I decided that I'm going to focus on Black mothers. Everybody has something that they can focus on and kind of do it. If we all just did that, it's also like, instead of one person doing 20 hours of volunteer work, what if we had 20 people doing 1 hour each? It's the same amount of work, it's just less of a burden, right? So just kind of think about that. Somebody said expansive gratitude. Thank you. No, I'm grateful for you for showing up and being here. Honestly, you could have been anywhere right now, but you're here with me, right? That's what Jay-Z says. So we have another one. As someone who works within a DV organization, I find the leaders of these organizations are not open to change or to extend their understanding of the work we do. How should we advocate for more support and understanding, not only for the social workers, but the clients as well? This is a huge issue. This is why I went from direct service. Thank you for your question. This is why I went from direct service to administration, because I realized that while I was on the front line doing the work, I had to take directives from people who had no clue about the work that we were doing. And like I said earlier, they had no connection to the communities. And we're out there trying to do what we think is right, only to go back to work and have them tell us, well, you shouldn't have done this way, and that's not how we go about it. So I was like, no, I need to move into administration, because I need to be somebody sitting at the table when we're developing these programs and we're making these decisions. We need more of us at those tables, changing how we do the work. But until you can get there, one of the things you have to speak out. And it's possible to connect with some of your colleagues and kind of form a little bit of a coalition and say, hey, we have some issues, and here's our little platform that we want addressed. These are 5, 10 issues that we would like to see leadership address, because we are out here doing this work. And we don't think that you all are connecting with what we're doing or understanding. I think every organization should have like an accountability committee, and it's a committee that can meet maybe once a quarter or whatever, or a committee that is formed to address some of these issues. One of the things I also do as a consultant is I work with organizations around these issues, and I come in and I do some deep, deep organizational trauma work, trying to help people facilitate these issues. Because as an employee, especially if you're getting paid and you have to report to your supervisor, it can be very difficult, especially in these times where nobody's trying to lose their job, right? So sometimes it's important to bring in someone like myself to help facilitate these conversations. And that way I can take, somebody gets upset, I'll take it because I'm going to leave. I don't have to work there anymore, but sometimes it does require calling in some outside help, because a lot of times leadership does not want to acknowledge that they are a big part of the problem. Nobody wants to think that they're doing this wrong. But sometimes it's not necessarily that you're doing it wrong. It's just you might just be missing the mark, and that's okay. But it takes brave and courageous people like yourself to speak up and say, hey, and send it via email. Hey, you've been thinking a lot, And here's some of the changes that we think need to happen. Okay, I hope that helps. Okay, we have another question. I'm noticing that rape crisis centers and organizations can get stuck in an appeasement trauma response, especially in relationship to the police and the legal system due to financial dependence. Ooh, yes. How can we empower our organizations to leave these abusive relationships and to create truly survivor-centered services? This is an amazing, amazing question, and I may not have all the answers, but I'm just gonna go off my gut. I don't like the police. I am very much an abolitionist. If you follow me on social media, you know this. I'm an abolitionist because I don't trust them, and I don't trust the legal system to do anything to protect us, okay? We see it. I'm justified in my belief. When have we seen that the police and the legal system really cares about people that have survived domestic violence and intimate partner violence? What examples do we have? We got judges blaming 11-year-olds because they were raped by disgusting men, but yet the 11-year-old asked for it. When you have a judge that sits there and can say something like that, the system is screwed up. So after you see all these kinds of cases like this, you stop trusting them. So how do we get our organizations to leave them? The organizations, that's tough because it's the funding, right? Like you mentioned the funding. Where are we getting our funding? We have to start looking in other spaces for our funding. And I know that is tough. That is the hardest thing for our organizations is the funding. But guess what? There's a lot of wealthy people out there who don't know what to do with their money. And we have to get better at reaching out to them. And I'm gonna say guilt tripping them. Get them in the guilty gut. Listen, you're not doing nothing with this money. How much have you given away in the last year? And I say that because I did work for a funder who had a lot of money and just didn't know what to do with it. And I was like, give it to me. I can do this. I can help this community. But you kind of have to be confident in your ability to ask for individual support. We have to kind of release our connection to city funding. Oh gosh, I hate to even say that because I'm not telling you all to give up the funding that you do have, especially when you have, that's all you have. But we got to start thinking of diverse crowdsourcing and other ways to be less reliant on them, because once we're reliant on their funding, we have to go by their rules. I think, again, like I said in my talk, we have to come up with more community solutions and less crowdsource solutions. The police should be the last people that we call when we have these incidents that come up. We should be able to have community support networks that we can call to bring in advocates, people that are doing mediations and things like that we can bring in to help with when these incidents arrive before we need to call the police. I'm really big on self-defense classes, and I'm not saying that women should be responsible for what happens, but self-defense never hurt anybody. I'm a big advocate of gun training and gun safety. Although we know that the presence of a gun can escalate the violence, they say 500%. But what they also should say is that it's happening with women who are not trained in gun safety and how to use guns. Just carrying a gun is not going to help you, right? Being able to protect yourself and survive that situation. I'm all about harm reduction. So if you can survive that situation, right? So how do your organizations team with local groups that are doing this kind of self-defense training and supporting and empowering women? And trust me, when you feel trained in self-defense, it really is empowering. I can only say that. That doesn't mean that it's going to stop someone from harming you, but you might be able to better get out of a situation and get the help that you need. Okay, there's another question. I hope that helped a bit. I mean, it's hard for me because I'm very passionately against police. So I don't want to make that, I'm not saying that everybody has to be on that wavelength, but I'm a bit radical in my views. So I would love it if no organization that was helping advocate for survivors of domestic violence have any connection with the police, because police are the biggest domestic abusers out there. Okay, they have a domestic abuse rate twice that the national average. So why are we calling on abusers to help us fight off abusers? That doesn't make sense to me. All right, so we have another question. Do you have any advice for survivors in our communities who are being targeted by abusers who far outpace our financial resources and power over long periods of time and are legally advised not to go public? Oh wow. It's tough because we've seen what's been happening, particularly with Me Too, and seeing, I got I got two friends who have come forward about being sexually assaulted by Russell Simmons, for example, one of the most powerful, wealthy men in hip hop culture, right? Somebody for whom, without whom we may not still have hip hop, right? And yet these women have come forward and have said that this man raped me, and they have faced public backlash and harassment and targeting, and it has been horrendous. And even just me sticking up for them and speaking up for them has led to me being harassed and targeted and things like that. That comes with it because we live in a society that believes that whatever happens to women is their own fault and that men should be able to do whatever it is they want to do. You have to, here's the thing. Again, I'm all about harm reduction. So I'm never going to encourage you to go into a lion's den when the lion is hungry and you're holding a bloody steak. But I will encourage you to continue to be courageous and continue to speak up. And that's why I'm always talking about building coalition and building community, because there is strength in numbers. It is so much easier, I should say, not easier. It's less burdensome when you are coming forward as a group and you have formed solidarity as a group to call out abusers than when you're doing it as an individual. Because it's easy for people to swarm on one person or two people. But when it's 20 or 30 coming together in solidarity, that's less easy for them to do. So, this idea of being legally advised not to go public, I mean, that's a tough situation to be in because, again, harm reduction. If coming public is going to bring you more harm and because you've been legally advised not to do it, I'm never going to advise a person to put themselves in harm's way. But I would need to know more about that particular kind of situation to be able to answer that more thoroughly. But I do know that power is a privilege and that wealth is a privilege. And when power and wealth come together, survivors of these violent situations are stuck. And I know that that's what happened to me when I was in college. And I had an experience that I never reported because I looked at myself as a poor Black girl coming from the Bronx. And who was going to believe me against these wealthy white men that assaulted me? And I never reported anything because I knew I wouldn't win. And to this day, I still believe it. I knew I would not have receive any justice or have any success because that's just how it goes. And it's unfortunate, but what we need to do is we need to build more coalitions and more support systems that can take on those powerful people and take on those wealthy people and take on these institutions, these colleges and universities that harbor these violent abusers, right? Like especially the athletes, if they're athletes, they let them get away with everything. We need to get more advocacy in those spaces. And I hope that came close to answering your question. Okay, we have another question. How do we start preparing communities to become that support for survivors and victims? So much pushback and stigma comes from our communities, which discourages survivors to rely on them. Do you have examples from your work? Yes. So how do we start preparing? So education, right? So I want to go back to that because my ex-husband was an adolescent health educator. And what he and his organization did was they put together projects and programming from as young as kindergarten, teaching these children about intimate partner violence, sexual assault, so-called date rape. That was the terminology they used back then. I know we don't use that much anymore, but boundaries, respecting boundaries and things like that. All of that, they were going into the schools and intervening early and teaching people early, right? And that goes all the way up through high school, right? That same kind of stuff can be done in communities. So what I was doing with You OK Sis, for example, and for those who don't know what You OK Sis is, it was a global anti-street harassment movement. I was actually going into communities and doing workshops and going into schools and doing workshops on bystander intervention. And it's really simple workshops and just kind of going in and talking to people. We put a lot of stuff online, but we have the digital divide. Remember that not everybody has access to social media. So we do still need to go into communities and still do these kinds of workshops. We can connect with principals and are welcoming of people coming in, especially if you're voluntarily doing it. Hold on one second. My internet is acting a little bit wonky. Especially if you are going and offering to do it for free, they will welcome those programs. So you can kind of go into the schools, start in the places of worship, the churches, the temples, the mosques, work with the leadership there and say, hey, I've got this program, I got this workshop that I would love to bring. Can we bring it? Can we come in and can we talk about these issues? Because a lot of times they don't address it because they don't know how, or they don't feel like they're equipped to do it. So if you're coming in as an expert, you can come in and really kind of alleviate them, but also kind of fill that gap. There's a lot of progressive faith leaders out there that are willing to do that work. I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, a lot of the stigma is coming from, again, this is so ingrained and socialized over generations and generations. And a lot of it is embarrassment. So part of it is actually when I say we got to name it and claim it and say what it is, that's also to work against the embarrassment that people feel when they're talking about these things. And a lot of people will avoid having these conversations because they're embarrassed or because it's a shameful thing. We have to destigmatize this and we have to release the people from their shame before we can get them to talk and to work towards being better and healthier. So yeah, how do we prepare communities? And you know what, it's really interesting because a lot of communities right now that are, especially those that are undergoing revitalization, are very focused on home ownership and employment and things like that. And sometimes they're engaging in these like series and they're doing these workshops. Well, how do we connect with the people that are doing those workshops and say, hey, can we throw in some about this? Can we throw in this? Okay, well, you're moving into a new home with your partner. How are you all going to treat this home with love and with support and with care? Here's some tips we have on how you can create a loving environment in your new home, in your new space. If you're going to have children, how you can make this new house you have a loving one, right? There's all kinds of ways. Again, we have to think outside the box and be a little bit more creative, but we also can't just sit idly by. We really have to be proactive and we have to like reach out and reach in and call in, you know what I mean? We have to do a little bit more of that. I hope that answers your question. I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has one. I'm losing my voice a little bit, but I could always just drink this Gatorade that I have here. Okay. No more questions, no more questions.
We have two coming in right here.
Oh, I see it. All right. I'll take these two. How did you find your voice as an artist? Oh, it's so funny. My very first story that I ever wrote, I was like 6 or 7 years old. My mom was a big AIDS activist back in the day. And so I was exposed to a lot of that kind of talk. So like my first story was about a princess who had AIDS, who decided she didn't want to marry no prince, but she wanted to spend her life advocating for people with AIDS. And that was the first story I ever wrote. I tell you, I was that kind of kid. And I knew then that like I wanted to do two things. I wanted to help people and I wanted to be a writer. I also wrote that story while my mom and I were living out of her car because we were homeless. So, you know, that's kind of where it started. How did I find my voice? It comes from life experiences. I've been through a lot. That's a main way that I am able to do this particular work and able to come and speak with you all in this kind of thing is because I have been through a lot. And one of the things I always push people for is sharing your stories. There's so much power in the stories that we share because when I can share a story like that and somebody can say, wow, I can relate to that. I had that same experience. People feel less alone and they feel more encouraged. Remember what I said about the solidarity and the coalition? Is you got to share your story. You got to be courageous and share your stories. And other people are able to connect with those stories. And then they feel, okay, wow, maybe we can do something about this together. So I found my voice through surviving all the things that I've survived and putting them to paper. Started writing things down, started journaling. Journaling became blogging. Blogging became writing articles. Writing articles began making videos on YouTube. Making videos on YouTube turned into speaking in front of audiences. And I have a little bit of a theater background as well. So I know that helps a little bit. How can we keep in touch with you? That is a great way to end this. You can follow me on Instagram at Feminista Jones. I'm on Facebook at Feminista Jones Official. I'm at patreon.com/Feminista Jones. I do have a lot of public stuff on there. I think the lowest subscription is $1 because, you know, this is the kind of work that I do. I'm on Twitter at Feminista Jones, but I don't really tweet anymore. I'm like, you'll see my bio, it says this is for business purposes because people like to tag me and things. Yes, I will put it in the chat. Let me see if it lets me put, oh yes, panelists and attendees. I'm just gonna put it because it's very simple. Feminista Jones on Instagram. I'm typing this as I do this. Twitter. Let's see, I'm gonna put the Facebook link. I hope this link works. It should work. Feminista Jones official, because they shut down my original one because somebody reported me for having a fake name, even though my name is trademarked. People are just haters. And then I'll put my Patreon on there too. These days, I'm on a lot of my Patreon stuff. It's stuff that I've been working on in school, which has been really great stuff. I'm really excited. I'm actually just got approved to do a workshop on fighting ageism in the age of Instagram, and where I'm going to be talking about ageism. Ageism is a really big thing for me too. It's gender-based ageism, because I'm going to be 42 in a couple of weeks, and since I was 35, I really became passionate about fighting against ageism. So you see a lot of that stuff from me too. So yeah, it's been really great, really, really, really great to be here. And I'm so excited that you all had me. I'm honored. I'm honored every time somebody asks me to come and speak and share my experiences and my thoughts about things. So, and congratulations to all of you. I'm sending you all a lot of love and encouragement because I know a lot of you are out there really, really, really out there on the ground doing this grassroots work, doing this difficult work of, you know, fighting against a centuries-old problem. We will win. We will win, and we have to understand that while we may not see it in our lifetimes, we are continuing this work in the paths blazed, and you know, these trails that have been blazed by people that came before us, who knew they wouldn't see it in their time, and we just continue to do their work, and we keep adding our own little sauce to it, and we keep pushing it forward, keep mentoring the young people, keep getting them involved, you know, so we keep pushing and keep pushing. We will not let up until we win. Okay. Thank you all so much for having me today. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for coming on behalf of the network and all of the folks who attended the conference and who are in our wider community. It's just amazing to have you here. And thank you as a mom who's trying to raise feminist sons. It's no easy task. So I appreciate you sharing that part of your story. It is great to have some solidarity with that unique challenge. So thanks so much. And best of luck to you. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you. Soon enough, I'll be Dr. FJ, and then we'll be doing some great stuff, I hope.
Absolutely. Best of luck with it.
Take care.
Thank you. And for our attendees, there's workshops and lots of great content for the rest of the afternoon. So enjoy the conference and have a lovely afternoon.